You that we're live. John, we're live. We're going to sit here and wait for just a couple of folks to come into this amazing opportunity that they get to listen to us chat about stress, which, I just posted again yesterday to try to get more people to come in and really was thinking about, okay, what do I say? And this is really a common denominator that we have across all of our friends, family, the world, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, oh, for sure. Yeah, stress is not only prevalent as a human experience, I actually think it's getting worse. As we get more global and we understand more information about what other people are going through, that can heighten the stress.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to have a lot of people that are going to want to join this and watch this later because there's, as you say, it's just increasing. And I think all of us are trying to figure out what can I do about this and probably actually want it to just stop. But I think some of the stuff that you're going to talk to us about is going to help us realize that differences of kinds of stress and how we can really think about it. So maybe we should just jump in and go for it. What do you think?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. Welcome everyone who's joining us today. And for those of you who are going to be watching this later, which we hope are millions of people, right, John? Keeping fingers crossed here, because we're talking about a topic that is so important to everybody these days. And that's really thinking about how to tame our stress and inspire stressed out teams. And I have the pleasure of being here with John Medina today to talk to you about this. Now, John probably wouldn't say all of these things. He's a humble researcher, teacher, speaker, and author of several different books. And he has been studying how the brain impacts stress and how we can use this knowledge to help us, help our kids, help our families. And it's really a pleasure to have him here today. He is hilarious and has so much knowledge and information that we're going to do our best to share some key points with all of you today and really help us think about how we can be at our best and tame this gremlin of stress that we have. So, John, welcome and thank you so much for being here today with us.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to talk to you, Kirsten.
So we're going to be talking about these three questions. What exactly is stress? Because I think there are some people who may have some misnomers about it. How does stress really impact productivity? And thinking about it in the workplace, what if performance is an issue and what do we do about that? Because I know that's top of mind with a lot of the clients that I work with is they want to be very helpful and they also want to be mindful of how to go about doing this. So can you start and talk to us about what the definition is of stress or how we should think about this?
Sure. Well, the slide says it all there. What hurts productivity is not the presence of the stressor, but the inability to feel in control of the stressor. WHO defines stress as the state of worry or mental tension caused by a difficult situation. That's the civilian definition. In the research definition, we've actually had a harder time with it. For the longest time, we had no idea what stress was, how to measure it, how to know what happens when it hurts people. Now we know. We were actually looking at the wrong thing. It's not the presence of stress that gets the brain that hurts productivity. It's the ability or the inability to feel in control of the stress. That's the thing that bugs us. The aversive stimulus we can handle all day long, but our ability to feel in control is measured in two dimensions. You can't control the frequency of the stress. And number two, you can't control the severity of the stress once it arrives at your doorstep. That feeling of being out of control, that's the stuff that does all the damage.
Well, sometimes I think people don't even know what the differences are in their own bodies, or they're like, I'm not stressed. I feel great. I have a great job. I have a great family. Stress isn't impacting me.
Yeah. It can fool you, particularly if you've been under stress for a long time. You can get used to it, and it's a normal part of your emotional ecology, particularly if you deal with micro stresses all day long. The problem with that is that micro stresses act a lot like deposits in a bank. The more stress you feel, the larger your account grows. And after a while, it can really get you. So you can habituate to a certain level of stress and think that that's absolutely normal. And then if for some reason the stress goes away, you realize how abnormal your situation has actually been and how much stress you have been under and what that has done both to your relationship with yourself and your relationship to the people that are around you.
So you said early on too, and we were saying it's impacting people more now with probably the pandemic, just globally. What are you seeing in folks in terms of stress these days?
Well, all over the world, the byproducts of stress, which are psychopathologies like anxiety and depressive disorders, those are on the rise. Interestingly, they were on the rise before the pandemic came. The pandemic seems to have acted more as an accelerant than a cause. Now it is now in the, I guess you would call it the post-pandemic sort of world. The stressors are still there. And you're reacting to, maybe you've had a death in the family, maybe COVID affected you directly. Those are the types of stress that would add on. But you were already stressed before we entered the world of COVID. It's just now that COVID has made it an accelerant. So it's extraordinarily important that we talk about this and that we deal with it. Yeah.
So what it's making me think, and I think when we were off camera, we were talking about this a little bit too, is like, when is this going to stop? When will the stress stop?
Yeah. Well, probably the wrong question. The stress will never stop, but your reactions to stress can change. And as a result of your reactions to particular types of stress, you can actually lead a pretty productive life. Let me give you an example. If you are feeling stressed about something and control really is the big issue, that it isn't the aversive stimulus, I suggest to people that they take out a piece of paper and they write 3 columns down on it. Here are the 3 columns. The heading of column number 1 is things that stress me out, things that piss me off, things that I feel negative towards. You just write those down in one column. In the second column, you rate the stressors that you've just written down on a 0 to 10 scale. 0 being, I feel completely out of control, and 10 being, yeah, I feel completely in control. That second column, you are to rate the level of control you feel over the stressor that you identified in the first. Then in the third column, you write out a plan. Not how do you get rid of the stress, because stress is going to be a part of our lives for all of our lives. And we're built actually to handle it pretty well. You need to have a plan to figure out a way to exert more control over a given situation. Perhaps I could give a business example. I'm not
Sure.
I'm an academic. I'm not a business type, but
You work
uh,
with a few of them.
but I work with a lot of biotech and pharmaceutical companies, and these days a whole lot of other folks
Yeah.
too. And I see the same thing over and over again. Let's say you have a project and you've been given a budget and you've been given people to work with on this project. It's not enough money and it's not enough people. You know you're going to fail. You also know that you are going to be judged on your ability to make this project work. So all of a sudden, you feel out of control because you know you need to get it done and you know you do not have the resources to get it done. So the first column is, here's my project. The second column is, man, this is a 0. I'm completely out of control. So the plan would be this: address where the control needs to be exerted. So you would say in the third column, develop a plan whereby you go to your direct report or your boss or whoever it is that's supervising you, and you say to them, I need more control over this thing. I need more resources. I need more people, or maybe I need more bandwidth and wiggle room to be able to make certain decisions fairly independently, given its dynamic. Whatever the situation is, that will allow you to feel in control. And when you begin to feel in control, research shows the stressors begin to go down. Your cortisol levels, that are your hormones, or if you're working with epinephrine, in the UK, you would call that adrenaline. Whatever the stress hormone that you're working with, all of those things begin to go down the more you feel like you can exert control over the stress. So don't get rid of the stress. You can't. That's a fool's errand. What you can do is figure out a way to control it.
Yeah. It's such a great example because that's probably the world that people are living in right now, and it feels out of control. So if I have one little thing that I can probably get control of, that can make all of the difference.
Exactly.
Well, and it's making me think about the next thing that we were going to talk about, which was really, how does stress impact productivity? Because let me tell you, there are some times where I feel like a little bit of stress is actually helpful for me. And I'm worried that if I don't have that stress behind it, I'm not actually going to get all the things done that I want to get done. So how does this impact productivity? What's that balance look like?
Sure. Well, you raise a really good point. In fact, it's called the Yerkes-Dodson curve, whereby a little bit of stress can actually improve brain function for a period of time. But it's only the type of stress where you still feel in control of it. Yes, this is an aversive situation, but yes, I have a handle on it. There comes a point where you peak out, where you begin to see what that slide says. A stressed brain is significantly less productive than a non-stressed brain. And so on the back side of the Yerkes-Dodson curve, what we call the right side of the curve, stress is still increasing, but your ability to handle it decreases. We know a ton of cognitive gadgets that go offline when you begin to experience the type of stress where you feel out of control. Your memory goes away, both short-term and long-term forms. Short-term memory, by the way, we call these days working memory. It's a temporary buffer where you can hold lots of information in your head and work with that information unless you're stressed. In which case the thing starts to go away. Your processing speed goes down. Your ability to be focused is changing. In fact, one of the big hits that stress can affect is a cognitive gadget we call executive function. Executive function is a multifaceted gadget, but it simply means, in lay audience terms, the ability for your brain to get things done. And so that last sentence there that says to stay focused on the task at hand in the slide is exactly that. Executive function has two giant components to it. Component number one, the ability to look at a task, focus on it, then defocus from it, go to another task, look at it for a while, defocus from that, and then go to another task. It's also involved in working memory. That's that short-term memory. And it's also involved in something we call mental time travel. Mental time travel allows most executives to make really good decisions if they're good at it. And it's part of executive function. What that is you know you have to make a decision and you envision what the consequences of that decision are likely to be given the constraints on whatever it is you're working with. You realize that some decisions by your mental time travel are going to be really awful. And you want to stay away from those. Others are going to be really, really good. And you want to go to those. Your ability to predict the future based on present reality gets hurt badly when you are stressed. So that's the cognitive control component of executive function. There's a second component. That component is called emotional regulation. Probably the crown jewel of all of it is something that you've probably heard of many times, impulse control. People who have anger management issues suck at impulse control. And usually it's because they have poor executive function. So it's a large gadget. Also something that's called affect regulation. It's called, in the real world, we would call that moodiness. If you've ever been around somebody for a long period of time and you have no idea whether they're going to come in pissed off at you or come in singing the Hallelujah chorus, but you can't predict it, you feel out of control, okay? They have poor executive function. When you become stressed, both cognitive control, your ability to be focused, your ability to mentally time travel, your ability to hold things in short-term memory changes, processing speed changes, and you yourself are more likely to get snippy. You yourself are more likely to get moody, if you will, because your executive function is changing. If you really want to become a better executive, dealing with stress is probably the one-stop shop that will give you most of the benefits, particularly if you've begun to feel that your behavioral display is eroding and your colleagues are beginning to notice it.
This is so important, I think, for people to hear, because oftentimes when I'm working with clients too, they'll say, I don't have time to work on this thing. I don't have time to get better at working with people. I don't have time to spend on what I need to spend. And it really is, the stress is impacting both their ability to make good decisions, get things done, and it's impacting their ability to have amazing relationships, which is what I think most leaders want to have. And so you're pointing out a good point of, like, stress is not something we can just keep, tucking under the rug. We've got to pay attention to it.
It's a little bit like saying, the engine in my car is not working very well, but I don't have time to work with it because I have to drive. Well, good luck. Eventually, if you keep driving, that engine's going to break down. Your brain is the engine of your life. And if you don't take care of it, most of the things you want to drive around with that organ are not going to work very well. So not having time to work on your brain because you need to do everything else, because you want to be productive, you want to be a star, you want to get a good performance rating. In our world, that's hysterical because we have it exactly backwards.
Yeah.
If you really want to be productive, the first thing you would do is take care of this thing. The second thing you would do is get to your punch list.
Yeah. Well, and so it's making me think too. So if I'm working on brain health, so many people think about your physical health and okay, well, I've got to get out for a run. I've got to take care of this body. How do you think about that connection and the importance of both of those things and how brain health might actually help with our physical health?
There is a single evidence-based protocol which can tamp down two great sides of the stress response. Uh, you have when you get stressed, you have a choice of two larger systems in your body to deal with that stress. One we call the HPA axis, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. The star hormone is cortisol. You may have heard of cortisol before, but that's not your only option. Some of you will not react with a cortisol display and stimulating the HPA axis. You will stimulate another huge stress sweet response. We call this the SAM, or sympathetic adrenal medullary system. And its crown jewel hormone is epinephrine, or like I say, if you're in the UK, you call it adrenaline. Only one behavioral protocol with randomized blinded trials backed up behind it have been effective against both responses. And that is John Kabat-Zinn's great power of mindfulness.
Yeah.
Not the type of, there's a lot of mindfulness out there. And man, I would warn your audience against the spurious stuff. I've seen a book out there called Mindfulness for Dogs. Okay. Mindfulness for cats, mindfulness for your pet caterpillar. You don't want those things. You want the stuff that actually is so strong that people like Dave Cresswell at Carnegie Mellon University has been able to map it to the brain, and other great researchers in their field. John Kabat-Zinn's mindfulness training, that is probably the single greatest tune-up. We stay with the analogy. The single greatest tune-up your brain can have. It takes you 8 weeks to start getting the benefits from it. But if you do it regularly and for the rest of your life, you will end up starting your day not with your to-do list, but with 15 minutes of John Kabat-Zinn marinated mindfulness. I'd get started.
I love that because that's a real actionable thing that we can do. And speaking of that, the last thing that I want to talk about, because I know, again, this is so important to this audience, is the question of, okay, I'm taking care of myself. I can do this for myself. What if I have employees and I want to help them and performance is an issue? What can I do about that? And I know you've got some strong thoughts on this.
I do. In fact, we titled this whole thing on a cognitive gadget we have not yet talked about, but boy, Kirsten, we're about to get to it. And that is the concept of theory of mind. So talking about theory of mind comes from the premise that you actually see on the slide. For the brain to perform at its best, it must feel safe. Psychological safety is key to high productivity in high performance, high complex situations. One example could be, let's say you've if you've got a valued employee, one you do not want to fire, but they're screwing up, or there's something that you need to add as a corrective. One of the first questions you can ask is this: if I want that person to stay with me, how do I make them feel safe? If you can make them feel safe using a cognitive gadget we call theory of mind, you're more likely to have the corrective be great, and they will respond to you. So let me talk to you about theory of mind and why I feel that way, and then maybe give another actionable step to.
And John, I shortened our time here, so you've got just a couple of minutes. You have a wealth of knowledge. What do you want us to know about theory of mind that's going to sink in most?
Absolutely. Theory of mind is the ability to know what makes somebody tick. It's the ability to understand the rewards and punishment systems inside their head. If you've got strong theory of mind, you will know what makes your employees feel safe and what makes them feel unsafe. And I suggest to executives that they keep a little list of the valued employees, the things that make those employees feel safe, and the things that make them feel unsafe. And if you've got to go and give a corrective, look down at your list and say, oh, I sure need to make this person feel safe in a very particular way. And as long as you are sincere with it and you're not arbitrary with it, you really do want to make them feel safe, they will indeed feel safe. And that's what you do.
That is so, I think in theory that sounds so good, and it's so easy to just skip over that step. step of the individual. What can I do for them? And how do I make each person feel safe, in addition to creating a safe environment for folks?
Yeah.
So I know you and I, we talked about this. We could probably talk for another 3 hours on all of this. And I love geeking out on it because it's so helpful for me. It's helpful for the clients that I work on. But I just want to share a couple of thoughts with folks. And maybe you can speak to something here that you just feel like you got to know this as you walk away from this call. Do you have
All
a
right.
thought?
Yeah, well, sure. Stress accumulates. That's for sure. It's like a bank. You've got to pay a lot of attention to the stress in your life. Even the micro stresses can hurt you.
Yeah.
You develop a safety reflex. The brain needs to feel safe in order to move beyond. The slide says fight or flight. It's the full-on stress response. It's mostly flight, by the way. It's mostly not fight. We're too weak to fight. But if you really want to get to know somebody, to understand what makes them tick, you will use the cognitive gadget of theory of mind. And if you are kind with what you see, when you pierce inside someone else's psychological interior because you understand their rewards and punishment systems, you will make them feel safe. And when that happens, you can give whatever corrective you need and still keep a valued employee staying working with you for years.
Yeah. Well, John, thank you so much for joining us and having this conversation with me, with this group. I know there's so much out there about stress, but I think you've given us all some real practical things to think about. The mindfulness piece, I'm going to be going and looking up that real quick, and really hope and encourage the rest of our audience to be doing the same thing, because I love your point. Stress is not going away. It's how we manage it, how we, bring it into a way that we can function with it and have a little bit of control around it. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Great to be here.